Hello and welcome to this special edition of Fortune India's Behind the Scenes series. We did the first one and we got some great responses. So now I've gotten the team together. Saurav Majumdar, Keshav, and Ashutosh are joining me because they are the team that have put this very special issue together. Ashu, can you just show us the issue very quickly so that everyone knows what we're talking about? An absolutely stellar cover out there. And then, of course, when you open this amazing print issue, it starts off with a forward from our editor, Saurav Majumdar. Saurav, it's fascinating that we have this list, the MNC 500, the first time that Fortune India is doing something like this, but this is massive. What really was the genesis of us getting together and putting this list together?
Thank you very much, Ayush. I must say, yes, it is indeed a very big milestone for us because it's the first ever MNC issue. What happened was Keshav and we were just having a chat, and then Keshav suggested, let's do something around the multinationals in India because these are all very large, storied companies. And the point I was making is basically that he was making is that, you have these companies which are now actually important players in the India growth story. They are not really multinationals in their thinking anymore. They do work for India, for the growth story. And of course, their market, like many others, is the world market itself. So it was a very interesting idea. And we said, let's go for it. Because the point I particularly like about this issue, Ayush, and I mentioned this in my edit as well, which is actually titled Partners in the India Growth Story, right? India Story. Now, that is exactly how multinationals feel now. Because what they say is that don't look at us as foreigners. Look at us as partners in the India story. I think that's the critical piece, which if you see the stories, read the stories in the issue, most of them keep telling us the same thing, that, we are partners in this Viksit Bharat India at 27, vision. We want to play an equal part and generate employment, generate growth, the growth triggers, the growth engines. We are as much part of the growth engine as any other company, domestic company in India. So that was the genesis. And Keshav and his team put together a stellar list. It was very hard work because, many of these are also unlisted. They have subsidiaries, they have affiliates. So lots and lots of work going in there, which really Keshav put together and his team. And we've had this list, very, very interesting list, even if I say so.
Keshav, the spotlight's on you because obviously Saurav's speaking with so much praise, but that means the pressure's on you now to come up with the next answer because it's fascinating. I was seeing some of the numbers, and in your opening essay, you speak about the heft and the depth of MNCs in India, and that's what this list really showcases: a cumulative total income of nearly $500 billion. Right. And we're talking about profits of nearly $27 billion. There's some fascinating trends as we even read. I love the imagery that you came up with from that Nariman Point office and an odd Beamer or a Merc driving past. I think it was fascinating to really tell us that tale, which we'll get to, Ashu, of India and Bharat that we'll also get to in a bit with the consumption story. But it's all the other trends, Keshav, that you really came across. Stuff that maybe we don't see in this edit, but that you genuinely can share with the rest of us.
Yeah, Ayush, thanks. And I think, like you touched upon that intro, that intro itself, I was kind of overpowered by the narrative that Janmejaya Sinha set. And it kind of set the tone for my story because here was a guy who, heads an MNC. It's a professional, it's a business consultancy firm. And it was very interesting coming from him to say that, that while MNCs have always seen India as a market from their parent thing. If you had to succeed in India, you had to kind of go ground down. Feet on the ground. You have to think local, customize local. So that was the one big takeaway that set the context, and that's where the success for most of the MNCs in India lies. That the more you have adapted to and customize yourself to the Indian nuances. So maybe like an Maruti or an Hyundai or, as old as someone like an Hindustan Unilever. Just about all the top guys in the MNC list have been there, done that, except for maybe the new entrants like an Apple, which came from behind and, has risen to the top of the ranks. But the big thing is that only if you think Indian and bring global stuff is how it works. Otherwise, it won't work. So we have seen in auto, like quite a few companies which have not been able to, prove themselves. And you have the two or three guys who kind of own 70% of the market share of the company. So that's the kind of narrative that kind of played across just about all the sectors.
Yes,
If I may just add to what Keshav said, the top of the list itself, Ayush, tells you the story of how they have, what to add to what Keshav said is, acclimatized themselves to India. Now, Maruti Suzuki is as much an Indian company as any other, right? It's an Indian company in its head, even if it may be owned by Suzuki. The fact that is one part. The second part is if you look at Hyundai, now it's got an Indian IPO. So, you have these companies which are very, very Indianized. You have Samsung. The three people on the cover are Maruti, Samsung, and Hindustan Unilever. Now, Hindustan Unilever is down to the smallest city and, B class and C class towns, tier 2, tier 3 cities. Now, you have all of them highly Indian in nature. That's the beauty of this today's MNC story, and that's what we also wanted to bring out.
It's fascinating. Some of the people on that cover really tell multiple stories within that larger India story. And JB Park.
And here I must acknowledge our photo department because, I know Narendra Bisht, my very esteemed colleague on the photo department, he leaves no stone unturned. And I must say this in the BTS because he sometimes I try to say, no, Naren, let's make something else happen. No, he says, no, we will go and do the shoot ourselves, not depend on external, shoots coming to us. We will do it ourselves. And that's how the three people he shot himself.
And it's the photos and then it flows into the design within the magazine. It's good to know that in this era of AI, we still have some of these classic good practices that we are following. So I think that's fascinating. In fact, JB Park, and you speak about the India story with Samsung, when I was sitting across the table from him a few weeks ago at Samsung Galaxy Unpacked, primarily spoke about the research centers that they're opening in India, how they're trying to really scale up manufacturing. So you're right, there's that Indianness to their approach. But sort of it's interesting because since this issue came out on Stands and on Magster, where I have been reading this for the last few days, and of course, you can, if you want the paperback copy, you can order it on Amazon. If that takes too long, you can get it on Blinkit and your favorite delivery apps. But basically, there's no excuse for you not to read the new Fortune India issue. But sort of, a couple of things have come up and we've been covering them on our website, Fortune India's website. When you talk about MNCs potentially setting up in India, Prime Minister Modi visited the US and there was that conversation with Elon Musk. Everything, that story has gone viral, by the way, the one on the Fortune page. Is he setting up shop in Mumbai? Keshav mentioned companies like Apple, tech companies that have really been playing catch up and they've done a great job. But there have been certain relaxations that have been offered to a bunch of these companies.
Like, just a correction, Ayush, Apple is not playing catch up. I said they came from behind and they have just taken over. They have made a niche for themselves in that sense.
They played catch up and they have now outdone and surpassed quite a few. But my point being that while there's that whole McDonald's approach that, you need a Mek Aloo Tikki here in India, localizing, contextualizing, there's also the fact that the Indian government's also meeting them halfway to a large extent, right? So is that really the way forward, Saurav, to make sure that more MNCs look at India with open arms?
Absolutely, Ayush. I think that's a very pertinent question because, we are talking about partners in the growth story, and partners cannot be, one partner cannot do the entire journey on its own, right? You have to meet each other halfway. And that's where the Indian government is also, the whole fact that the Prime Minister had a separate meeting with Elon Musk tells you something, how important many of these MNCs and these storied companies globally are for India. Because, while India is a huge market, there's huge entrepreneurial energy and all of that. It is a global player today. India is a global, force to reckon with. The whole idea of a Viksit Bharat is to have, 8 to 10% growth every year. So that to achieve that, you need every single solitary player to play their part. And MNCs, India is a global market, so MNCs are welcomed. And the government is very clear that MNCs, it will do whatever it takes to ensure, of course, not at the cost of Indian companies. That's very clear from the government. It will enable, but it will enable, on an equal footing. So I'm sure they will meet the MNCs halfway. And talking about Tesla, you can already see, the results of Mr. Modi's meeting with Elon Musk. I think the things will happen in due course. There's been much anticipated over the last 2-3 years in particular, and now it's probably going to happen sooner than later.
But Saurabh, just to add to that, that's an interesting point that you touched upon with that how Tesla, whether they will make it or break it, because as you've seen in auto, it's a highly concentrated play where you have got
Absolutely.
three, and all the guys are struggling in the 10% market or sub 10% market share. So it will be interesting to see, what kind of an capital allocation strategy Tesla is willing to, put top dollar on India and say that I
And
am
like
going
you
to.
said, and like you wrote, Keshav, in your story as well, the opening essay, that it's not an easy market to crack. So,
Correct.
while one part is the government, welcoming these MNCs like Elon Musk and Tesla, but Elon Musk will have to do his own math, right, for the Indian market. It's not going to be something which is, coming to him on a platter just because he's Tesla. So, and you have established very long-term players also struggling at the lower end, like you said, and the market is premiumizing at every level, right? So it's very, very interesting to see how Tesla cracks it.
It's fascinating you're saying that because while Elon Musk might be doing, his little bit of a recce with India, he didn't show up the last time. He ended up in China after the proposed meeting
True.
and that whole trip that we were waiting for. But just if you study Tesla globally, they're not known to really tailor make or customize their product for different markets. Even if you look at what they're doing in China. So when you talk about homologation here in India, talk about ground clearance, talk about some of the rules and the inconsistencies with build quality, I think he has an uphill task. It's not, and the Tesla dream is not necessarily selling, especially like you said, some of the companies you mentioned over here and the other auto companies, Mercedes, BMW, Hyundai, everyone is really ramping up. And our homegrown players, by the way, Mahindra,
So
Tata, really
like
ramping up their electric vehicle vision, right? So it's not an easy task for Elon Musk.
yeah, because I mean, I had the chat with Bhargava, and he has seen the evolution of Maruti. He said that he is not very excited about the whole EV transition, and he says that hybrids is the way for India. And if you see, and
But Keshav, they've been saying that for the longest time, but now everyone's latching on to the EV wave. It was supposed to be a stepping stone.
it is not. But if you see on the global side, people are pulling back on their EV investments. So it will be very interesting to see. And Toyota, by the way, has sold 4.1 million hybrids, not EVs, of its total EV. I mean, so that's a real big
That's a very
takeaway in that
interesting
sense.
point, actually. Yeah, because EVs versus pure EVs versus hybrids, and Toyota, like you rightly said, has cracked that game. Some fantastic cars from the Toyota stable on hybrid. I think that's one thing, and the other point is, of course, Ayush, like you said, we must now segue into the big development, which is the budget. Ashu is here. He's the resident, as I call him, the resident expert on everything to do with finance ministry. Knows everybody there is to know. So, and he's written a fantastic piece summing up, which is essentially a multi-layered, multi-diversified kind of a budget. If you read that story, and we have a third cover, Ashu, you may want to sort of show this to our viewers. This third cover, the cover also. This is we are calling it a blockbuster budget, and we have a third cover featuring the finance minister herself. It's a 3-cover issue, so we are pretty proud of it. The fact of the matter is that this budget, and Ashu will take us through the elements of it, this budget is truly a blockbuster budget for what it seeks to do for consumption. And when we talk about cars and other, Samsung and televisions and electronics, there is nothing, the common thread, therefore, is the consumption, the consumption conundrum, which we were calling it, because that urban consumption has been stressed. So, Ashu, would you like to take us through the budget piece?
So, Saurabh, the one thing that I would like to point out over here is that, this budget had a very specific backdrop. We had been fighting against, slowing down consumption, a slowing economy. So these were the two big contexts for under which this budget was prepared. And if I am, if I am to allow, to draw parallels from the mythology, what I would like to say is that the finance ministry has really taken out the trident to address the macroeconomic woes, so to say. And the first year of that trident being, push growth through consumption. And that's where the big tax cut comes in. You remember that in 2019, the government had given a big dole in terms of tax cut to the corporates. Now it seems that the government has kind of given this opportunity to the middle class. They have in fact shown faith on the middle class and the common people of the country to come out to spend. And if I am to tell you some very important figures related to this, rupees 1 lakh crore will go into the economy. 1.5 crore people will move out of the tax net. So with that kind of figure, being that 1 lakh crore of additional spending in the hands of people will move into various sectors. It will go into, you just have to name it, be it auto, be it general consumption, be it e-commerce. So that is the kind of push they have given. And the
Ashu,
two
there is one
remaining.
concern. There is one concern, if I may sort of add to what you're saying, is that will all of this go to consumption, or will some of that be, in savings or in, buy now, pay later stuff, which will add to the household debt? So, what exactly is, is it a gamble in that sense from the finance ministry?
See, it is a gamble, but I think Finance Secretary has explained this in a very nice manner. In fact, he was posed the same question as to why does the government feel that it will go to consumption. He clearly said that we are not saying that it will go to the entire money will go to consumption. He said that the money may go to consumption, the money may go to investments. Even if it goes to the banks in form of savings, the banks get liquidity, which will
That
again
will power growth.
indirectly come into
Correct.
the economy. So it is in fact a bet that the government has taken, but of course it is a calculated bet. And the other two aspects of the trident that I was mentioning is that all this has been done without compromising the fiscal side of it,
Yes,
fiscal
that's a
aspect
very
of
big
it.
plus. Yeah,
Yeah,
very
and
big.
and the government has also given a good debt curtailment road map. The only thing is that when you actually draw a trident to kind of kill the enemy, there are some energy drawdowns as well. And in this particular case, what I would say is that capex is one of the aspects where some compromise has been made. But I think, in fact, we have mentioned in the copy also in our interview with the expenditure secretary Manoj Govil, he has clearly pointed out that look, fiscal deficit was expanded post COVID. It was a requirement at that time, and at that
Mm.
time we had given a roadmap. So we have to stick to that roadmap. So now, I
Yeah,
mean,
you
finally
cannot
the
expect the
onus.
government to constantly have front load this and
Exactly,
keep
exactly,
taking the burden. Some burden has to be
exactly,
taken by the population at large, right? So are we then
exactly.
saying, Ashu, it's very interesting you say this and very beautifully put, but the trident analogy particularly. But what I was trying to say is this then a situation, even Mr. Garg, Subhash Chandra Garg has mentioned in his column that the capex growth, driven growth story may be coming to maybe tapering off. So is this now a situation where the government is expecting the individuals, the people at large, to shoulder some part of the growth, push?
Yes, of course. I mean, that is the big expectation from the government side. They have tried capex, and it has worked also. It is not that the capex story hasn't
Of
worked.
course.
And one of the important developments over here is that the capex story is now having its own ripple effect. The government capex that has happened over the last 4 or 5 years is crowding in private capex. Though, we would like to have more traction on that front. But it is not that the government capex has not worked. So this is also one of the engine that government wanted to fire up, because one thing that we need to understand over here is that when we talk in terms of infrastructure and capital investment, the gestation time is very long. But our economy needed a smart quick fillip, and that is something that can be brought about through consumption also. So obviously the onus on the vast multitude of people, middle class, the aspirational class, as we say.
Absolutely.
Although that's just to add, to that point that Ashu made, about the capex push. Somehow it beautifully ties into the topicality of that MNC issue, because the biggest beneficiaries of the government capex has been the Hitachis, the Gs,
Exactly.
Siemens, and
Absolutely.
you've seen what has happened to the re-rating of their stocks in
Correct.
the market, and that is what the Hitachi guy has also said, that this is the best ever. And for a company which has been there in 1900s, entered India, and they are being the biggest beneficiary. And somehow, I think even the consumption boom that the government has done through the tax breaks, in that sense, you might see that the top guys, maybe an Apple and an Maruti and a Hyundai, that will be the biggest beneficiaries, because if
Absolutely.
people tend to spend, the money will go to them.
That's exactly Ayush. Coming back to
Yeah,
your point about how much the government is moving ahead and
yeah,
meeting them halfway. I mean,
yeah.
this is another way of doing the same thing, right?
Sort of
Hmm.
tying back to that point, there's one more story in the issue, India's consumption mismatch by
Hmm.
Ajita, which I
Hmm.
found
Hmm.
fascinating given the macroeconomic data points there. And Ashu, tying in to, this whole bit, the consumption focus in the blockbuster budget we were talking about, just, looking forward, right? Saurav mentioned a pertinent point about how much of this will go into investment savings, right? Will the compounding effect really work? My question there is, with consumption patterns changing so much, especially with the new generation, not necessarily investing in material possessions. What they essentially want is services, experiences. That's what Gen Z is really talking about. Do you think that there was more policy articulation needed in this whole larger, budget speech and then document that would augment this whole piece to really spur the consumption story and have an even increased compounding effect?
See, when you cut the taxes and when you actually put the money in hands of people and you leave it to their discretion, it is a given that the money will come back to the economy in whichever way, in whichever format it has to come back. The one thing that I would like to point out over here uh, is that there are indications that both North Bloc, as in the finance ministry, and the Reserve Bank of India are in fact working in a very in a very the symphony is visible in terms of look at the budget. Okay, 12 lakh annual income up to 12 lakh completely tax free, and then days after that the RBI comes out and cuts the rate. It gives a final indication that okay, we will cut the rate. And even before that, the RBI did some liquidity measures and kind of pumped in rupees 1 lakh crore. So 1 lakh crore you get from budget, 1 lakh additional crore you get from the market operations of the Reserve Bank of India. And also one point I would like to bring over here is that the government has already set up the pay commission, and the pay commission recommendations will come followed by the money that has to be the additional amount that will be that will flow in into the economy as an impact of the pay commission. So the runway for consumption growth is really long. So let I mean, it will be very microscopic view of whether the government, whether the budget should have come out with a larger picture of something. It has to be a sum of many things, and we have to look at it in that particular context only. So the joint efforts by RBI, the finance ministry, in terms of what has happened in the budget, and also with what is likely to come as an impact of recommendation of the pay commission.
Ashut, one thing I really liked about this budget, and you have broken that story, in fact, is that marginal, marginal taxation just above the 12 lakh limit. That's something also, I must say, that it shows also that the government is mindful of these small details. It's not small because, if you are just a little bit ahead of, above the 12 lakh, limit, then also the government has tried to make it easier for the individual. I think these are the micro details which I think I commend the finance minister for and her team for thinking of these smaller details because I think
Definitely,
that is very
definitely,
very
yeah.
important and it's really interesting to see. And Ashu, of course, you broke that story. It's very interesting, and that story also went viral because everybody was keen. Yeah, I just above the 12 lakh threshold. What will happen to me? Should I have to pay the entire tax in that bracket?
Exactly.
So so it's a very interesting thing, and also she's done fantastically well in keeping the fiscal deficit in check and the glide path very in fact a bit better than the glide path for the next year.
Right,
So I
right.
think so these are things I think and yes, the Reserve Bank would have heaved a sigh of relief seeing this budget and immediately got into action. Do you think it's one of more in terms
One
of
of
rate
more as
cuts?
in?
Rate
Yeah,
cuts?
yeah, 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 yeah. More is likely to follow. Once the inflation trajectory is comfortably it comes down. Obviously, the RBI will take further measures as far as rates are
We have limited time left on this conversation, but just to shake things up, right? Because this has been so much fun getting into these edit meetings and understanding how all of us, even in different locations, have been putting this together. I'm going to turn the tables because now, if I ask Saurabh this question, he'll say, you can't have a definitive answer. So I'm going to ask Keshav and Ashu because you guys are responsible for two of the most blockbuster stories in this issue. So let's do this a little differently. Keshav, if someone had to pick up this issue and only read about the budget, tell us one reason why it is unmissable to read the budget part of it, not the MNC piece, only the budget piece.
I think the clearly for what the takeaway that beyond the headline that that just that the limit has been increased, like Ashu has clearly articulated why the budget is different this time around. So it clearly has been a very thoughtful budget, but the intricacies of why it makes, I think that's where the insight is, and I wouldn't want to give away the insight because then it takes away the whole charm of reading the piece. So
Spoilers.
I think Ashu is the better judge of.
Ashu, so now no more budget chatter with you. You've seen what the team has done with Keshav and team has done with the MNC piece as well. That is a comprehensive list. What is that one reason? If you have to put it out on our Instagram and our Twitter and everyone, our X, and everyone has to know, shouting out from the rooftops, why that MNC piece is absolutely indispensable, unmissable.
Well, I think it captures the India story very nicely as to what India has in the offing. What are the repercussions of the policy which really trickle down, and the kind of environment they create for investment, for sustainable growth. And that is something had it not been for Indian government's policy perspective and the policy paradigm, the shift that have happened, be it 1991, be it in the later years, nothing would have happened on the ground really. So this is basically some policy imagination translating into the economy on the ground, on the physical reality is being created. So that's why I would like to suggest that if you have to go through it, read what India offers, what an aspirational economy like India offers.
Absolutely fascinating. Guys, in this short conversation, we've started off with MNCs to the budget, whether Elon is setting up shop in Mumbai and so much more. And this is just a sneak peek, a preview of what we have in store for you if you pick up that issue, which you should, or just sign into Magster and read some of these stories. If you are being very lazy about it, the Fortune India.
By the way, may I also add, Ayush,
yes,
we now have the e-magazine on our website as well. So we have the e-magazine on the website. So it's not just, there's yet another way in which you can read Fortune India, and you can just sign in and read the magazine fully in the magazine format on the website.
And might I also add that our social media is firing on all cylinders. Instagram is growing. All these stories from Ashu, Keshav, Saurabh, all of these are now in video form, in carousels. There's a bunch of content coming your way. Really cool things are happening here at Fortune India. Thank you so much, guys, for joining me in this behind the scenes session. I hope to do a lot more. And thank you so much for watching this. We'll see you in the next one.